Welcome to Mile High Reefers. I'm Scott Anderson, and I don't do a lot of water changes on this big 210-gallon tank. So in this video, let's talk about how and why I run this system without doing a lot of water changes. When I started keeping fish in the late 90s, everybody did water changes. It's just how it was. And then when I started keeping saltwater fish in 2006, pretty much everybody did water changes. Then I started watching YouTube, and I watched a guy named New York Stilo. Odds are you've heard of him if you're watching this channel. But New York Stilo didn't really do water changes on his reef, and I always wondered how he was doing it. Well, come to find out, if you design your system right, you can really run a tank without doing much in the way of water changes. So let's talk about why we do water changes to begin with. So let's take the most basic possible tank you could have for saltwater. Let's do a glass 10-gallon tank. Let's throw a heater in it and an air stone to give a little bit of flow and oxygenation for the water. Now, when you put that fish in there, as soon as that fish goes in, it's going to start to breathe and urinate, and it's going to start to produce ammonia. Well, ammonia is horrible. So in that system, you're going to have to do water changes to keep the ammonia really low. And this actually describes what we're doing with the most basic of quarantine systems. So if you keep a quarantine system, you know you have to do water changes every day just to keep that ammonia low so it doesn't kill your fish. Now, as fish keepers, we've quickly learned that we have to keep some sort of filtration to keep the chemistry the way we want it. So the most basic is going to be biological. So that's when we have rock or some sort of media in there that allows us to have a nitrogen cycle. Basically, we're going to have bacteria that live in that rock or sand bed or media that start that whole nitrogen cycle. So we're going to change the ammonia from ammonia to nitrite, and then the bacteria will change the nitrite to nitrate, and then different bacteria. If you have an amazing system with really thick, heavy, dense rock, can theoretically change nitrate to nitrogen gas, completing the system. And under that system, you really wouldn't have to do a water change to get rid of nitrates. But the important part to this system is we take ammonia, which is deadly, and change it to nitrite, which is less dangerous, and from there we change it to nitrate, which is even less dangerous to your system. Nitrate, where ammonia is a poison, nitrate is going to be more like a nutrient. It's going to be what your algae feeds on that grows in your tank, so you want to keep that low for that reason, and in high doses it can actually cause problems for your fish. So now in our theoretical tank, let's go ahead and add some rock in there, and let's put a sand bed in there. I know not all of you like sand beds, but let's put it in there. So now we have a full biological system going on in there. So now instead of doing a water change every day, we can maybe do it every week, because we are no longer producing ammonia to kill our fish. We just have nitrates. So nitrates are going to build up over time if you don't do the water change, and they're going to grow algae, and if you let it go high enough, they can actually become deadly to your fish. But they're going to have to get really high before that's a problem. So in a reef tank, we want to do more than just control nutrients. We've got a lot more chemistry going on. We've got calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, micronutrients, and all of that also has to be controlled. So let's take our theoretical saltwater tank. It's got rocks on it. Let's throw a couple lights on there. Let's put a couple pumps on there to get the water flow going. And let's put a couple of Montipora stony corals in there. So we're doing our water changes, and we're keeping up with it because the Monties are in there and the calcium and alkalinity is being taken care of with just the water changes. And it's fine for a while. But over time, we're going to add a few more coral to the tank. Those coral are going to grow. And now the alkalinity and calcium and micronutrients are going to start getting stripped out faster than our 10% water change or whatever we're using, unless we're going really big. So now in our theoretical reef tank, we need to start addressing the loss in calcium, alkalinity, micronutrients. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to dose. Easiest way to do it is we're going to dose two-part, right? So we're going to add calcium in an alkalinity supplement, and we're going to dose a little magnesium. How do we know when to dose? Well, we're going to test our water to find out when we dose, and if we can automate it, it's going to be better. We can dose more often, and we can dose more precisely, and we're not going to forget about it. So now in our theoretical tank, we're dosing calcium and alkalinity to keep up with it, and the water change is mainly there to get rid of nitrates and phosphates. We haven't talked much about phosphates, but phosphates will build up over time. They're another nutrient. They're going to mainly be introduced from the food that you're feeding your fish. So our tank has fish, it has coral in it, and we're doing water changes to take the nitrates and phosphates out, and we're keeping up on our calcium and alkalinity through dosing. Now, this system will allow you to keep healthy fish and coral indefinitely. It's going to work brilliantly, and you can do it. Downside is water changes are a pain in the butt. You have to mix the water up, you have to carry it, you have to dump it in, you have to drain the old water out. You got big heavy buckets you're carrying around, and that's not so bad on our little theoretical 10-gallon tank. But on this, a 10% water change is 45 gallons of water. If I was to do that with 5-gallon buckets, it would be horrible. Now on this system, I don't have to use 45-gallon buckets, but it becomes a big deal. The other thing is water changes don't actually do that much to your nutrient levels. So let's theoretically talk about this 210-gallon tank. I've got a big sump and filtration system in the basement. This system is 450 gallons total. So imagine I had 25 nitrates in this tank. With those 25 nitrates in the tank, 25 parts per million, I would drain down 10% of the water, add 10% back in new. So theoretically, we will have taken 10% of that out. 10% of 25 is 2.5. So I've done a 10% water change, and I'm going to get 2.5. Well, if you look at a Saliford nitrate card, the change in nitrates it goes from 10 to 25, which means my 10-gallon water change isn't even gonna show up on my test kit. So to get from 25 to 10, odds are I'm looking at a 50% water change, which is 225 gallons of water, which for most of us would be crazy, and it's also expensive. 225 gallons of water is going to be like $50. That is an expensive way to bring it down. Plus, making big changes like that to a reef tank isn't really the best way to do things. We want stability. Because remember, when I do that big water change, I'm not just bringing nitrates down. I'm going to change my calcium, I'm going to change my alkalinity, I'm going to change the micronutrients. If I do big water changes, I'm gonna just start stirring the pot and making things crazy in the tank, stressing the coral, which is the last thing we want to do. And herein lies my problem with water changes. To make an appreciable gain on any nutrient, whether it's calcium, alkalinity, nitrates, phosphates, you have to do big water changes, or you have to do lots of little water changes. Either way, it's stressful to your tank, it's a lot of work, and it's expensive. So to bring nitrates down on a tank like this would be massive water changes, really expensive, and to keep calcium, alkalinity, everything in the right parameters for a tank like this would be crazy. That clam uses so much calcium and alkalinity. All those stonies up there, piles and piles of calcium and alkalinity. I'm struggling with my calcium reactor to keep up with all this stuff right now. So for your big reef tank with lots of stuff in it, water changes alone aren't going to keep up with what you want unless you're doing pretty good size water changes daily, which is probably more than most of us want to do. So what does that mean we need to do? Well, for calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, like we talked about before, we can dose. Micronutrients, we can dose. Phosphates, well, we can run GFO, or we can use one of those other products like lanthanum chloride or phosphate RX that I haven't personally used, but supposedly they work great. So we can get those out chemically. And then there's all the yellowing agents and toxins from your leathers in the water and just nasty stuff we need to get out. Well, your water changes aren't going to do a very good job at that. You handle that through carbon. You run a carbon reactor, you put carbon in there, it takes all of the nasty chemicals out, and that's really all there is to that. So really, all that's left for somebody like me is to do water changes to remove nitrates and other stuff that I can't test for. So let's talk about nitrates for a minute. There's a few ways to deal with it. First, deep sand beds are supposed to work. I've used them for years, never had a ton of success. The other thing you can use is big rock. The Pucani rock in the middle is about 30 pounds of Pucani rock. So I'm sure I'm getting some denitrification out of that one single rock. Also, we have refugiums. So a refugium is going to be a section of your sump that's lit that you grow algae in. The good thing about a refugium is it's completely natural. It removes phosphates and it'll remove nitrates. It's low energy use, low cost, but you have to be really big to service a tank like this. It's doable, but not a lot of us have that much space to dedicate to your refugium. A small refugium with a cheap light on it's not going to do any good. So you're going to have to put big expensive lights on there, and you're going to have to work at it. And odds are, in a small refugium, you'll never get what you're looking for here. Which brings us to the algae turf scrubbers. They're kind of a step up from the traditional refugium. You concentrate your light where you need it, so your lights don't have to be quite so big. Plus, microalgae does a better job at removing nitrates and phosphates from your system. So turf scrubbers are brilliant. I use one on my 24-gallon Nano. It's a Santa Monica Union, and it's been doing a really good job for me. So I highly recommend a turf scrubber for a lot of applications. Unfortunately, big turf scrubbers for a tank of this size can get pretty expensive. You can DIY them. There's a lot of options there. So maybe that's not perfect. And then we come to carbon dosing, the opiate of the reef tank, in my opinion. I've used Bio Pellets for many years with good and bad results. If used in small dosages correctly, they can do wonders. They'll keep your nitrates really low. They'll take a little bit of your phosphates out and potentially even add a bit of food for your tank. Here's the caveat. If you put too many bio pellets in your reactor, you risk killing off massive amounts of coral, which is what I've personally done. About this time last year, I had a mass die-off. I lost a large portion of a lot of my Montipora colonies. Luckily, they've grown back, but I lost the majority of my bird's nest corals, and that sucked. By the time I got bird's nest replanted, the monies had taken over, and so I'll give you a brief idea on how bio pellets work. Basically, they're going to release sugar into the water. There's going to be a bacteria in there that are going to feed off of the bio pellet sugar, and it's also going to feed off of the nitrates and the phosphates in the water. Those bacteria theoretically are skimmed off by your skimmer after they fed on the nitrates and phosphates, pulling the nitrates and phosphates out of your water with your skimmer. Now, skimmers are something I haven't talked about yet. Skimmers are, in my opinion, just a necessity. They take the proteins out of the water, they foam up, proteins come out, waste is physically removed from your tank. Now, a protein skimmer on its own will not prevent you from having to do water changes. A protein skimmer with carbon dosing or a Refugium could get you where you want to be. Now, the protein skimmer is going to be a necessity for any sort of carbon dosing you do. There's a lot of options. There's sugar, there's vodka, there's vinegar. Red Sea has a product that's supposed to be amazing. Now, I haven't personally tried any of those. I've stuck with Bio Pellets. And in fact, I've just put the Bio Pellets back on my tank. So this is 450 gallons of water, and in that massive Bio Pellet reactor, I've put a cup of Bio Pellets. Now, my nitrates aren't too bad. Right now, I'm at 2.5. So we're not doing bad in this tank. And I'd like to keep it that way. They're kind of starting to go up. They're showing up. I'm not shooting for 0, but I want to keep nitrates relatively low. Now, absolute 0 is probably going to be bad for your tank. So there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of info in this video, and a lot of this is just kind of my experience over the years. Personally, I'm kind of leaning more towards skimmer, Bio Pellets, amazing biological filtration, and a massive skimmer. Now, on my 24 gallon, I'm using a good size skimmer, and I'm using a turf scrubber. Now, the turf scrubber on a small tank is fantastic. On this tank, it would probably be expensive, and I already have the Bio Pellets. In all honesty, if I had to choose between carbon dosing and a huge turf scrubber, I'd probably go with the huge turf scrubber. But in my current situation, due to price and space, a massive turf scrubber is probably not a realistic option. And I do run a Refugium, but it's pretty hokey, lighting needs upgraded, and that'll probably happen in the future. So yeah, you can totally keep your tank doing water changes. It's just, in my opinion, way too hard. It's a lot of work. Your results aren't going to get you where you want to be. Once you start keeping corals, you're going to start dosing stuff anyways. So why not just treat your water, make your water, baby your water, make it as perfect as possible. So that's why I don't do a lot of water changes, is I work so damn hard to get my water where I want it to be. Why would I drain it out of my tank? Now, that's not to say I don't have problems. As you know, I'm struggling with an alkalinity issue. I am somewhat worried that at this point, with all of this coral, this massive clam, another one downstairs, and the frag tanks downstairs, that I am using more alkalinity than my calcium reactor is capable of feeding back into the system. That's going to be a problem, but it's really not something I can solve with water changes. And then there's my 24 gallon tank, which from a water change perspective is pretty easy. I can do a 5 gallon water change and get about a 20% water change, which is fairly effective. Except I still need to run a protein skimmer because without it, that tank struggled. And then I've added the turf scrubber in there, and my nitrates are undetectable without doing any water changes. So now to get my water where I want it, I just have to dose calcium and alkalinity. And dosing a little thing of calcium and alkalinity is way easier and way more effective than carrying big heavy buckets of water up the stairs from the basement, draining water out of my tank. It's just more than I want to do. Plus, I don't get the stability in the water I want. Because after I do the water change, the nitrates start to rise, my calcium and alkalinity starts to fall off, and then I do my water change and it somewhat corrects. But with a turf scrubber from Santa Monica and the protein skimmer and some dosing, I'm able to keep things fairly flat. I'm able to keep things where I want them, which is what you want. Stability is incredibly important for your reef. Your corals can adapt to your numbers being a little bit off. What they don't like is major swings all the time, which is what I'm trying to avoid. So I don't do water changes, at least not very often. The main reason I do a water change on this tank is to fill my quarantine tank downstairs, because I take the water from here and take it down to fill that tank. It's an easy way to get the water for the fish. That's the only real reason I do water changes in my 210 gallon tank anymore. So what do you guys think? Am I nuts? Yeah, a little bit. But I'm telling you, if you work on your water it's going to get you where you want to be. If you want to be a bit more scientific, there's companies like Triton out there where you can send your tests in. They'll tell you exactly what to do to your tank to keep your water where you want it to be. I personally haven't tried it, but they're overlaying the scientific method and scientific testing on reef keeping, and I have a feeling that is going to be the way of the future. So thank you for watching this episode of Mile High Reefers. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.